The two most exciting bets or investments you can make right now, in my opinion, are Bitcoin and DeFi. And it's not just in crypto, that's in the entire world. The asymmetric upside of both those bets is astronomical if they work out. Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer cash system with a hard cap supply. So in a world with infinite money printing, it's pretty easy to see that thesis why Bitcoin has done so well. Now, DeFi is peer-to-peer banking and trading and lending, all the things that centralized financial infrastructure does, but decentralized. So you can see how big that upside would be as well if the DeFi systems grow as big as traditional banks. Most people separate those two things because a lot of DeFi lives on Ethereum, while Bitcoin is very good at being Bitcoin. But what if you combine those two things? What's the DeFi opportunity with Bitcoin, and will DeFi live on Bitcoin? On this episode of the Profit Maximalist Show, I'm joined by my friend Anthony Pompliano, better known as Pomp. He's invested over $100 million in early stage companies, one of the most well-known Bitcoin investors in the world. And Pomp is proposing a $10 million investment in a company that's building DeFi on Bitcoin, combining two of the most exciting areas that I think about every single day. And I had to have him on the show to understand what this trade is, what's the upside, and can we make some money on it? I think you guys will enjoy this episode. But before we get into it, I want to remind you to hit like right down below on the video. I want to get this thing to 200 likes, and also subscribe if you've been enjoying these interviews and market updates. And one more thing before we start the show, I'm really excited about this, and I want you guys to go check it out. I just launched my own trading bot, which runs on an automated trading platform called Stacked. Stacked lets you see the trading performance of about 60 automated strategies, and you can rank them very clearly by which strategy has done the best, and you can hook up your exchange so that strategy trades for you. The first month my strategy was live, it was the best performer on the platform, and I'm giving free trials away right now. Just use the link right down in the description. And to make it even better, my show sponsor, Bybit Exchange, the best place to trade Bitcoin, is giving you $200 in free Bitcoin when you create an account and deposit using my link right down below to try out that trading strategy. Now let's get to the conversation with Anthony Pompliano talking about his $10 million investment, Bitcoin, DeFi. This one might challenge some of your beliefs, and it also might open up a pretty interesting investment opportunity for all you guys if you find it interesting. Enjoy the episode, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.
From here, and that's up.
How is Miami, man? I wish we would have got to connect. It looks incredible. It's like a Bitcoin city. What's living like down there? You down there full time?
I'm here full time at the moment, and I'm enjoying it. It's one of those things where the weather's nice. It just makes you have a more kind of active lifestyle, frankly. And so, especially when my friends are sending me photos and videos of snow in New York, it's been nice to have a little sun in my life.
Yeah, it's like when I was down there last weekend, it also seems like just the amount of crypto people there. I mean, I ran into someone that worked at the block at our pool at the hotel, went to two different meetups. One of them wasn't even crypto focused, and it turned out there was more crypto guys there than normal people. So it just seems like there's such a lot of mind share happening there. And then also what the mayor's working on. It's just insane.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is have the feel of Silicon Valley, like 2012 to 2014, 15, where you get a certain group. They all are in one geographic location. There's an energy to it. And frankly, there's just not a lot of bullshit going on, right? It's just people who want to build stuff. You don't yet have the kind of large corporations that can throw tons and tons of money. I literally went to Facebook. I think it was the Christmas of 2014. They threw their Christmas party on the baseball field of the San Francisco Giants. Like, you got to be a pretty big company to do that. And so there's not that much going on here yet. It's still very kind of startup and early stage type companies and founders, which are fun and exciting and a lot of energy.
Yep. Man, I think I'm going to move down there in 6 months. We'll see. But I'm incredibly bullish on Miami. I'm kind of jealous.
Do it. Let's go.
Jealous you're getting that warm weather. All right, dude. So two big ideas I want to talk about here. You just said before we started this that this might get you canceled. We'll see if it does. I'm excited to talk about it regardless. Last time we talked, this was beginning of 2020. I think you were giving me your 2021 predictions. It was before Corona and everything popped off. Stopped in New York to chat, and one of the big themes of that conversation was DeFi and whether Bitcoin was going to become or move towards that decentralized infrastructure being built on Ethereum DeFi, or if the infrastructure was going to start being built around the best decentralized money, which is Bitcoin. It's the infrastructure going to be built there. And you kind of related all this. You're talking about a story in 2018. you're on this battleship talking about ICOs, how this is all going to crash and burn. Obviously, that turned out to be correct. And you have to kind of decide, do you believe what the market believes? Do you believe what you believe? Right now, there's decentralized infrastructure being built on ETH. That's what the market believes. Do you kind of believe something different? Is this going to shift? Because you announced a big investment too. But first, let's just talk with the big idea. Is the market right here, or is Pomp right here?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily so binary, right? Between the market having to be right and me or me having to be right. I think it's more so part of that conversation we had, what is it now, over a year ago at this point, was just that framework for evaluating this is that Bitcoin, kind of one side, is decentralized digital sound money. And decentralized is a really big, important component of that. So is sound money. So it's outside of the control of anyone or any organization. You can't create more of it as a finite supply, and which ultimately drives scarcity. But the challenge historically has been that majority of the infrastructure around Bitcoin has been centralized. So there's amazing companies that have been built, whether it's on the exchange side, on lending, et cetera, but it's all centralized. And so naturally, people who have tried to build on top of Bitcoin in any sort of permissionless or decentralized way, historically have said, hey, this is too difficult. And they've gone on, and obviously that's why Ethereum was built to begin with, kind of the smart contract platform, this idea of like Turing completeness. And in the Ethereum world, what you get is you get that decentralized infrastructure. And so there's, incredible projects that have been built. If you just go down the line from Aave, Synthesis, all the way on. And it's very obvious that at least early on, so far, the market has adopted some of it, right? Uniswap is a great example where it's doing probably like 50% of the of Coinbase as a decentralized exchange. And so, I always start these conversations off with like anyone who says that there's zero value being created is just kind of being intellectually dishonest, because it's very obvious that the market has adopted some of these projects and technologies. Now, there's two questions that go into it. One is how sustainable is it? And then two is, will there be things that are built in the future that disrupt those, right? And so when you look at one of the challenges to the Ethereum kind of decentralized system is, one, there is no sound money as the base unit of that, right? So you have this ether that is, a unlimited supply. There are expansion and contraction decisions that are made on a periodic basis around the money supply. To the credit of the community, it has always contracted, right? And so the thought process is heading in the direction that it should, but the programmatic aspect of it is not there. And then on top of that, you basically always have the option to be inflationary to respond from a security standpoint, et cetera. And so that sounds like fiat currencies, right? Central banks are able to expand and contract the money supply as they see fit, as the market changes or data changes. And so I think that the belief that I have is you've got to take the decentralized digital sound money, which is Bitcoin, and you've got to marry that with the decentralized infrastructure. And so I drew literally, I think it was like 2 years ago now, I drew this kind of diagram where it was like in the top left, you have infrastructure, bottom left, you have decentralized sound money, top right, you have decentralized infrastructure, and then in the bottom right, you've got Ether or some other kind of non-sound money asset. And so you got to bring together the two sides. Now, the question is, how does that happen? And so the first school of thought is, well, let's bring Bitcoin to the decentralized infrastructure. And so you just with RenBTC, TBTC, WBTC, you just go down the line, right? How do we basically port Bitcoin over or make it somehow interoperable, but use the decentralized infrastructure and bring Bitcoin to it? The second school of thought, and the school of thought that we talked about last time I was on the show, and I've been talking about for a while, is, well, what happens if all of a sudden people figure out how to build decentralized infrastructure on Bitcoin? Now, there's plenty of people who, when I say this, immediately say, you can't do it. And I say, okay, let's hold constant for a second or ignore whatever your belief is in the current state. But if I said to you, I was asking a couple people on Twitter the other day, I said, if there was decentralized infrastructure on Bitcoin, would there be an argument for people to bring their Bitcoin anywhere else? And, as with many of these things, there's a lot of kind of tribalism and the religious zealotness to it. Ultimately, I think most people agree there wouldn't be as big of an incentive at all to bring your Bitcoin off of the Bitcoin network and kind of port it across. Now, it's important to kind of talk about, like, that doesn't necessarily mean all this other stuff goes to zero, right? There's plenty of other things that are being built that maybe they exist, maybe they don't. I have no clue. I spend most of my time thinking about Bitcoin and kind of this idea that decentralized sound money, if it is going to ascend to global reserve status, one of the most important things that we need a fully vertically integrated financial system that is completely decentralized, completely permissionless. And so when you start to look at, well, why is centralization not necessarily the number one thing when it comes to some of these other platforms, it's because there's a trade-off, right? Decentralization and security is a trade-off maybe with some of the more innovative, higher transaction speeds, bells and whistles that are being built in these other areas. And so ultimately the market's going to have to decide specific use cases. Is one better than the other? And so I think right now, as a store of value, everyone has decided, from everyone being the market, Bitcoin is the superior store of value in the market. Now, that doesn't mean that Bitcoin will solve every single use case in the world, but it also doesn't mean that Bitcoin it has a 0% chance of solving everything else in the world, right? Like this is all being built in time. And so what I'm super excited about, interested in, is if somebody can build decentralized infrastructure around Bitcoin, it really, really starts to change the way that people think about this new financial system, because now you have vertically integrated decentralized digital sound money with that decentralized infrastructure. And to me, that is something that is very, very hard to compete with, regardless of if you're the financial system or you are some of these other types of assets or platforms.
100%. And that is why your recent announcement is so exciting. You announced, or proposed, I should say, a strategic investment from Pomp Investments into something called Sovereign. And a lot of people are familiar with DeFi on ETH, right? But less people, I would say, are even familiar or aware of the progress that has been made in what you were just describing, a vertically integrated financial system that is being built on Bitcoin. Even if less people kind of know about that or on board with that, it's happening. And you proposed a $10 million investment into something called Sovereign. In order to kind of explore how that would work, I think just from a big perspective, what is Sovereign? So that everyone gets it. And then if it makes sense, what I would like is everyone listening to kind of rally around this idea. I find it fascinating. But first, I kind of want to let you give the pitch here. What is Sovereign? How would this actually work in practice?
Yeah, so the easiest way to think about it is they have built technology that empowers any sort of decentralized financial application on top of Bitcoin. And what I mean by that is decentralized exchange, decentralized lending, etc. And so the key difference between Sovereign and some of the other things that we've talked about, Uniswap, etc., is just that it's built on Bitcoin. The way that it kind of technically works, there's tons and tons of complexity and detail here, obviously, but it's used something called merge mining. And so you can think of this as the ability to leverage the asset in a non-custodial way to participate in these decentralized financial applications. And so many people have heard this saying, not your coins, no keys, no cheese, all that stuff. Basically, this aligns with those ethos. And so for me, what ultimately becomes really exciting is this isn't just one single team that's building the technology, right? There is Sovereign, but they're building off of something called RSK. Then there's also other teams like Money on Chain. There's Munib and Stacks and Hero, right? There's a people who are working on this. And so each group has a kind of a different variation for how they're doing it. Also, some of them are necessary infrastructure to empower the others. So for example, RSK is important and a key component for Sovereign to be built. But ultimately, and literally it's in the name, Sovereign is trying to build these decentralized financial applications that returns the sovereignty to the individual across the financial services. So it's not just about decentralized, it's now about the decentralized financial applications as well, and vertically integrating those two things.
One of the interesting parts that I learned about Sovereign when I was listening to your talk with Yago, who's a team member over there, and just kind of diving into the project, was Sovereign itself. Like the whole idea using that merge mining is you get Bitcoin security, you get its user base, you never have to give up keys of your Bitcoin. Like that's valuable. You can start to see why it would be attractive if more of the DeFi mindshare and applications are being built around Bitcoin. But at the same time, it also has a token. So it has one of the things where a lot of the Bitcoiners kind of rally against, more tokens, having to hold something that's not Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on something like a sovereign token, right? Like using these Bitcoin side chains, yes, now you get to use Bitcoin security with merge mining, but you also now are adding tokens. Like are Bitcoin-based tokens attractive? Do you think those are things that are going to be around a long time? How do you think about Bitcoin-based tokens in DeFi? Is that kind of creating the same thing?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of key pieces here, right? And I always take a step back and I say, like, forget all of the mental models you have in terms of the most hardcore of Bitcoiners all the way to kind of the altcoin, anti-Bitcoiners. And for me, I don't think that actually a majority of people are anti the actual technology itself, like let's say a token technology. What I think they're anti is the intentions behind those tokens, and also what many people would consider to be misleading marketing of what's actually being built, right? So for example, if you're selling a token to somebody and you're saying, hey, I have a decentralized financial application, but it just runs on Amazon, then you're essentially just misleading people because it's not decentralized. Yeah. Right. And so the best example and epitome of this, and look, that I'm very clear that like I understand that there's some Bitcoiners who will disagree with me on this, but my perspective is if I had a design of a piece of artwork and I put it on a t-shirt and I sold it, no one would say anything. If I took that same design and I put it on a poster and I sold it, no one would say anything. If I then take that design and I put it on a digital file and I sell it, all of a sudden there's some portion of the audience who says like, oh my God, that you're an idiot. And so, by the way, like that's fine. It's a fair criticism. But my perspective is just that every single one of these assets is going to continue to do that. I also believe that eventually we will have these kind of non-fungible tokens built on top of Bitcoin as well. Right now we don't have it. So like I'm learning and trying to figure out kind of how this works and how there's other types of assets that will come. But to each their own, right? So I think it's important to kind of separate out the intentionality from the technology. I don't think a lot of people actually are anti-technology.
Sure.
With that said, when you start to look at the Bitcoin ecosystem, to take Sovereign, for example, essentially what they're doing is they are trying to benefit from the decentralization and the security of the Bitcoin system and provide that sovereignty to people, right, for these decentralized financial applications. And so what this token essentially creates is, the best way to think about it is if I'm walking into the system, I put Bitcoin on that system, all of a sudden there's an economic stake. So the people who are using these decentralized financial applications who are helping to govern this stuff, they've got to put an economic stake up to prevent them from being a nefarious or a bad actor.
Okay.
And so when you start to understand this, what you really see here is that this vertical integration of the decentralized financial applications with Bitcoin itself, when you have a decentralized system, you're going to need some sort of economic incentive to keep all of the players doing the thing that they're supposed to do, right? So if you compare this to the traditional world, what does equity give you, right? If I buy shares in Apple or some other company, I get governance rights. I can vote on things. There's proxies, all that kind of stuff. And then I get some sort of capital appreciation or depreciation exposure. The share price can go up or down. Or three is that I can receive a dividend if the company so chooses to give that out. And so those are kind of the three kind of key benefits to me. Now, I have a claim on cash flows, a claim on assets, all that kind of stuff. But really, those are the three things: governance, capital appreciation, and dividend. And so when you look at something like a sovereign system, what do you get? Well, you have governance rights. So you're able to help to put your vote forward in this system. It's a community, right? Literally, I had to put a proposal forward to invest. It's not like I can just call up a founder and say, hey, let's negotiate terms, and then I get to invest, right? So there's a community aspect to this. And then the second thing is that there is a token that is built on top of this system that will either appreciate or depreciate in price. And then also there's a yield component to it, right? And so you can think of that almost like a dividend in some way. And so what we're literally doing here, and again, it all goes back to, this is also what the Ethereum and other smart contract platforms are trying to do as well, is rebuild the global financial system. But they want to do it in a very unique, digital, decentralized, in some cases pseudonymous way. I ultimately believe in that final vision. And I think most people who are probably watching this, regardless of where they think it's going to play out, we all agree that the future global financial system is going to be decentralized. It's going to be digital. We're going to run the entire system on these open protocols. A lot of pseudonymity is going to be provided. There's going to be a lot of privacy-centric type technology that gets built. And ultimately, when you get those things all coming together, you're going to get this automated financial system where you get streaming payments and kind of all kinds of cool on-chain cash flow, et cetera, that I think people are really excited about. The debate right now is just, where does that get built?
Yeah.
And I think that the Bitcoin world, what they believe is that you need the most secure blockchain to do that on. And I think that actually the Ethereum world, from what I understand, and maybe people disagree and they can correct me, is the Ethereum world actually believes that the most important thing is the composability, the smart contracts, all this stuff. So if you look at that, that's not a direct zero-sum trade-off.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you all of a sudden could build smart contracts and composability on top of Bitcoin, my guess is actually a lot of people in the Ethereum community, like they would say, look, we have the most secure chain plus all this stuff. Their argument, and again, you can claim whether it's fair or not, is that you can't do this stuff now, and we want to be able to do it, so we have to go somewhere else, and we built Ethereum, and it's secure enough, right? There's all these kind of things to it. And so ultimately, I just say, look, in a world where there is smart contract capabilities, there's a composability on the most secure chain, will value flow there? And I think most people say, like, yeah, if that world could exist, value will flow there. There's just a debate on whether, from a technical perspective, can that happen or not. I tend to think and be more optimistic that it will happen. Other people are more pessimistic. We'll see. Like, my opinion doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Like, the market's going to decide if this can happen or not.
The thesis there is clear to me as well. If it is built on Bitcoin, I think value does flow here. And even if long term it is a winner take all type thing, it's certainly not zero sum for both camps to be building. Because the strides forward on one platform or one side, it will be able to be transferred to the other, and we'll learn things throughout it. The only problem, I guess, the hurdle that I still have is like that composability, even if you value that less than Bitcoin's security, like the reasons you would want to build on Bitcoin, if you value that more than the composability and some of the stuff that's happening on Ethereum, is I think that composability is what is driving so much of kind of the action, being able to be exposed. You know, one of your big ideas is everything will be digitized. So you have real estate digitized, you have stocks, all these synthetic assets. The amount of time that it would take for that stuff to actually be built on Bitcoin could be just astronomical, like to catch up. But I guess if your thesis plays out, it's like eventually it happens and it wins. So kind of continue pushing on where you think it'll happen. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that there's, there's no black and white world, right? Yeah. There's kind of this like gray area or blurring of the lines. So first is there's a philosophical difference, I think, between the Bitcoin community and others. The Bitcoin community is very, very intentional about kind of the development process, especially for the layer one technology. And it's because, look, there's $1 trillion at stake now, and they understand the importance of this, and they have, 100-year view, if you will, right? The idea that this is not just how do we make it as innovative today as possible, it has to last.
Yeah.
And so far, the market has determined that security and kind of that viewpoint is the most valuable thing in the market. Could change in the future. I don't think it will, but that's where we are today. When you then look at it and say, okay, the Ethereum world, I think there was this whole idea around sharding and kind of layer one scalabilities and all this stuff. And again, I'm not overly technical. So like there's plenty of people who are watching this who are way better versed on this than I am.
Me too.
But my understanding is that the thought process has evolved. And now it's not so much about the layer one scalability. There's now this conversation around, well, layer two actually may be the better way to scale some of this. And so when you look at that, you say, okay, hold on a second. If layer two is actually where all of the value in terms of this composability and scalability is going to happen, well, that's the same argument that Bitcoin has, is that we're just going to do everything at layer two. And so now Ethereum and Bitcoin start to look very similar in terms of their structure, where layer two is kind of playing out with a lot of this. But the difference is that Bitcoin security at the base layer is very, very different than these other things. And so I think that, again, there doesn't have to be one winner, but there is a high chance that there is only one winner, right? When you start to look at, well, layer two, now is it less about there's multiple layer ones? What if there's one layer one and there's tons and tons of layer twos, layer threes? Again, I don't know if that's where we're going, but that is a possibility in the future. And so to me, what becomes really, really interesting is even if you look at kind of another layer two technology. So I'm really excited about Sovereign. I think what they're doing is incredible. And if it is successful, remember, I'm a venture investor. If it is successful, it will be massively valuable in the future. But you can also look at something like Stacks. Stacks, which has a product that's been built in just a few weeks, already has, I believe, is hundreds of millions of dollars of kind of locked value. And in many cases, it's growing faster than some of the DeFi projects and other smart contract platforms are. And so again, what happens there, nobody knows. How quick does it grow? Does it accelerate, decelerate? Who knows? But I think that people have to understand that there is a very unique perspective in the market that if you can build smart contracts and decentralized applications on top of Bitcoin, and I don't care how hard it is, but if you can do it, I think people are underestimating how much value is going to flow there. And that to me is the ultimate type of investment opportunity that I see. I see the entire market going somewhere else. I see them all convinced. There's a consensus that this other view is correct. And I believe that not necessarily that they have to be wrong, but I believe that they're underestimating the potential in things like Sovereign, et cetera. And so if I am correct, there is asymmetric upside to be captured. And so this is like, the perfect setup for things that I look for, because ultimately what you want to do is you want to believe in something earlier than everyone else, and you want to be right. Now, by the way, if I invest $10 million in Sovereign and the community, welcomes me with open arms and I'm wrong, then I'm just the idiot who lost $10 million. Right? But I'm okay with that, because you have to make enough of these asymmetric bets to benefit.
Yeah. You're at least starting to change my mind a little bit. I had never dismissed it, but I couldn't see it couldn't contextualize whether or not it was a possibility. I wanted to see projects doing it. And when we chatted beginning of 2020, you said you kind of kept it a little bit more private. You said, no, I know some companies that are building over there, and it's cool to see some of these things actually coming to fruition. As you said, yeah, it's going to take time to see it play out, but taking that risk with the asymmetric upside, I think you're a good example of someone who's been able to find those bets frequently enough that it does pan out. So definitely starting to pique my interest. For everyone listening and wants to see the proposal, I can't recommend it enough. Go to Anthony Pompliano's Twitter, check out that proposal. If you also find it interesting, show support. It's a community proposal, so it needs community support. I find it pretty fascinating, so I'm going to be digging in there a little bit more. Pomp, one of the big ideas I have, kind of switching off whether it's going to live on Bitcoin or live on ETH, one of the big ideas I have is DeFi, regardless, is beneficial for Bitcoin. And I'm curious if you agree with that statement, because it's still, I don't want to talk too much about tribes, but that seems to be like a contentious idea, that DeFi is positive for Bitcoin. Having decentralized exchanges that have a ton of liquidity, I think that's a good thing for Bitcoin. I even think the interest for assets other than Bitcoin that are digital are good for Bitcoin. I think NFTs are good for Bitcoin. Do you agree with that? Or do you think NFTs and all this other stuff is a distraction? We should only be focused on Bitcoin. How do you kind of think about that? Because a lot of people look to you for where they should be focusing their attention.
Yeah. So, and again, there's a whole different subset of people who are watching this and listening. So you've got the most hardcore Bitcoiners who think Bitcoin only, nothing else matters. Then you've got kind of a larger group of Bitcoiners who I think say, Bitcoin plus things built on top of Bitcoin. And then you kind of go out in orders of magnitude from there to things like this other smart contract platforms, altcoins, et cetera. And for me, what I explain to people is I believe that majority of the value here is going to flow to Bitcoin and things that are built on top of Bitcoin. I do not subscribe to a mentality that means that every single other thing that ever is built is going to be worth zero, right? Do I think that they are the place to focus? No, I'm obviously focused on where I'm focused. And so, just follow kind of what I'm doing, and that'll tell you where I think most of the value is going to get created. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, who knows? But with that, what I do think is that similar to the way that users come into the system, with the price movements of Bitcoin, some of these other things pull more and more people in. So for a long time, let's use something that's pretty non-controversial: central bank digital currencies. Literally, I think you can go back to 2018. I did a segment on CNBC where I was saying that it was imperative that the U.S. digitize the dollar immediately. Now, a bunch of people afterwards were messaging me and say, "Why are you saying that?" And my whole thought process was the following. One, other countries are going to do it. So if every country is eventually going to do it, we should do it first, because then we'll accrue value as a country. Second, if we digitize the dollar, it is going to drastically accelerate the adoption of digital wallets. And I fundamentally believe that if there is feature parity when it comes to technology, meaning that all the currencies are digital, capital will flow to the soundest, hardest money. Mm-hmm. And so the switching cost between the dollar and Bitcoin will actually drop drastically, and therefore Bitcoin will accrue more value. And so when you look at something like that, you say, okay, like that's an interesting way that Bitcoin benefits from the dollar being digitized. So now you have price appreciation of Bitcoin brings people in. Digitizing the dollar would bring people in. Same thing, I think, actually, with things like NFTs, et cetera, is if somebody is saying, hey, I don't understand cryptocurrencies, but I actually really like art, or I like the NBA, right, with NBA Top Shot or whatever. One of the first things they have to do is they have to go get a digital wallet. And so it pulls them in. Yep. Now, yes, over time, I still think that there's going to be some security things that people have to pay attention to. But I think that what you're ultimately doing is you're pulling more and more people into kind of this digital financial world. And to me, I just go back to, I think there's like 100 million people in the world that have some sort of cryptocurrency type exposure or digital wallet, et cetera. We got a long way to go from 100 million to 7 billion, right? Yeah. And so it's to some degree, should it be Bitcoin only at the start? I think that that's just a somewhat view of the world where that's just not how the world works in general, right? You can't say when the internet technology is being adopted, which was kind of what ended up being the dominant open decentralized protocol. You can't say, hey, only can use this for e-commerce. No, you just get people on. People are going to do all kinds of crazy shit, right? And so like, that's okay. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're right or that they're wrong. It's just like, that's how humans operate. And so to me, what I keep pounding the drum for is just there is going to be a decentralized global financial system. And that decentralized global financial system, in my opinion, is going to use Bitcoin as the core unit of account. And then from there, as long as people want to enter that world, I don't care where they come in. But because I have a deep-seated belief that ultimately they will flow to where these decentralized financial applications are going to get built in a vertically integrated way with Bitcoin, that decentralized sound money. I could be wrong. I'm happy to be wrong. I'm talking about this all stuff publicly, so I'm even happy to be wrong in public. I've got tons and tons of skin in the game. Like, if anyone loses on this stuff, I'm probably going to lose more than most. But again, it's just this belief that, like, to some degree, you have to have an opinion. And my opinion is that most of the market is missing the one key insight, which is it's not about the technology innovation. It ultimately comes back to that security. It comes back to that vertical integration on the decentralization side. And so look, I said it a year ago, everyone laughed at me. I'm saying it again now. I think people now are saying, like, wait a second, there are a couple of projects that are doing this that look interesting. If we talk in a year, my guess is that people say, you know what, I tried it. It looks pretty interesting. Like, I could see a world where this exists. We'll talk a year after that. People will say, oh my God, like, I actually think this might win, right? We'll talk a year after that. And then maybe at that point, it's like, oh, look, this stuff did win. But like, most people don't have the patience to have kind of a multi-year view on this stuff. It's just, it's hard, but that's why I really like it. That's why I actually want to invest. It's because it's hard. Yeah. Because if these guys figure it out, that means it's going to be really hard for other people to compete with them. And to me, that's where value accrues.
What I'm going to do, I'm going to just add a calendar invite on this day for the next couple of years. And we'll do this every year. It'd be fun to kind of go back to this clip, say, all right, where are we at in a year? How many more people have converted, or are they switching back to the other side? One of the things, you've done a great job summarizing the sovereign proposal. People, like I said, people need to go check that out. I think people also understand now the trade-offs and why it at least makes sense to focus a little bit on the infrastructure Bitcoin side. The last part, I think that kind of concludes your thesis here on why that value goes to Bitcoin. And I want to ask you this. I think I know your answer, but you do a great job of kind of taking these big ideas and putting them in simple words. Is people have been making now the argument that Ethereum is going to be more sound money than Bitcoin. And that is kind of the core of your thesis is that's just not true. Partially because the market has decided Bitcoin's right, but also because the properties of Bitcoin, it's programmatic. The monetary policy is very clear. It's understood. That thesis is pretty clear. On the ETH side, they're saying, look, EIP 1559 is going to make this deflationary. So in that way, it's even better than Bitcoin. Bitcoin's still inflationary. I want you to kind of destroy that because I've had a ton of Ethereum shows lately, and I like getting kind of the push and pull and for people to get a full perspective and then make the decision on their own. Why is Bitcoin more sound money now, and why is it going to continue to be more sound than something like Ethereum, where they're saying Ethereum's catching up there? So why are they wrong there?
I don't know necessarily if it's like destroying somebody else's argument. Again, I always tell people that like I'm actually not anti anything else, right? Like to me, it's just about the thing that I understand best and I spent the most time on. And I spent more and more time looking at a lot of these other smart contract platforms and decentralization stuff to make sure that I understand what's happening there. But the one piece that I think the Bitcoin community has understood from very, very early on, if you go and you look at some of the writings on the Bitcoin Talk forum and things like that, is that currencies are a belief system and narratives are very important in that. And so the narrative around Bitcoin is that it is sound money. Now, thankfully, it actually is sound money. It's outside the system. More of it can't be created. So it kind of checks all the boxes when people apply intellectual rigor to it. But ultimately, that is the narrative. And to me, it's a timing thing where we just saw $6 trillion marketing campaign play out for sound money. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately what you've got is you've captured the hearts and minds of people that this sound money exists in the digital realm and they're adopting it. Can other things, right? Any platform tomorrow could say, you know what, we're going to just go to a finite supply, or we're going to go to some sort of deflationary monetary supply schedule, yada, yada, whatever. Yes, you can do that. But the difference is that you have a transitory monetary policy, and that is actually something that is rejected by the Bitcoin community in terms of the immutable ledger is one component, but this programmatic, transparent monetary policy, by having it be programmatic and unchanged, people don't think that tomorrow Bitcoin is going to decide to change the monetary policy. But people definitely think that in the future, if you change it now, you can change it again in the future. Yep. And so how many times did a central bank say, oh, we're going to raise rates, right? We're going to contract the monetary supply. Then something happened and they go, oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to actually decrease rates, or we're going to increase the monetary supply. That variability ends up being the exact opposite of what Bitcoin provides. And so can you change the properties? Sure. But what you can't do is you can't capture the narrative and the mind share and the belief that people have that this is not going to change, right? Again, Bitcoin, if more than 51% voted to change some of this stuff, it technically could change. But there's not a person in the world who believes it is going to change. And so as much as we like to talk about like don't trust, verify, and kind of the technical components here, there's still humans that make up this market. And the human consensus around something is so strong. And we've seen attacks on that social consensus, right? In terms of block sizes and things like that. And I think what people have learned is that the Bitcoin community will literally defend the network and the properties of the network with their lives, right? I mean, it's literally that serious. And so that sounds insane to outsiders, but insiders understand that the core components of this network are so important. And I think that what we're seeing in these other networks and platforms is they're essentially treating things like monetary policy, which is the holy grail of something like Bitcoin. They're treating it as a feature. It's something that can be iterated on. It's something that can change. And that variability and the transitory nature of it, I think actually becomes a risk when you start to talk about things like sound money and you talk about things as like the core unit of account, is you basically have just replicated in a different iteration what we have in the legacy system. And so I think that's the beauty of Bitcoin. And that's why ultimately it's going to be so hard, if not impossible, to unseat it as that core unit of account in this digital world.
Yeah, taking the narrative and mind share head start that Bitcoin has, it's like that can't be caught up to. But I think the argument on the Ethereum DeFi side is we have the infrastructure built, you can't catch up to that. I feel like that's easier to catch up to because those are features you can add versus the mind share narrative, the belief. is something that it's not necessarily, you can't just build it in. It's very hard to catch up there. So the thesis is definitely starting to make a lot more sense to me on the sovereign thing. I find it fascinating. Before we wrap up here, I want to ask you a couple rapid fire ones. You've been doing a ton more shows. I saw you on Bert Kreischert's. You were just on Andrew Schultz. You gave a $1 million Bitcoin price target 2026. Hadn't seen that one before. Do you still think we see 100K this year? People love these price targets, even if they're ridiculous. So what do you think?
Yeah, so I think I got to go back and look when I wrote it, but I think it was in 2019. I said 100K by the end of 2021. And I still got some of the screenshots of the response. And people literally thought I was insane. And my thought process was just like, look, we hit 100K after 18 months or so after the next halving. Right, it was essentially kind of the very simplistic thesis. And so we're sitting today, over 50,000. We're closer to 100K than zero, as I like to say. So I think that we'll hit 100K this year. Somehow I've become the most conservative person in the room.
Oh, yeah.
In the last 2 years. So, there's people who think it's going to 200, 300, 400, whatever. We'll see, right? Like, can there be a blow off top? Absolutely. But 100K, I just feel really kind of confident and haven't changed that. And then the thought process on $1 million, which is kind of 10x from that. It's $1 million after the next halving, and so in 2024, the next halving, kind of 18 to 24 months after that, we'll hit $1 million. And so, in some weird way, Bitcoin is rather simplistic in its design because of that programmability. You can just extrapolate out kind of where we go, and actually in any one of these things, what you may do is you actually may be too conservative because you're merely extrapolating demand. The historical demand. And so demand's accelerating. Like there's more people coming in than people expected. And that's where you kind of see, prices are ahead of some of these targets. And so I just stick with, just the natural halvings drive the supply shocks. Those supply shocks lead to price increases. It's kind of economics 101. And so 100K this year sounds good. And then $1 million by end of 2026 feels good as well.
They both sound good to me, man. It'll feel good, $1 million. $1 million Bitcoin. It's funny that the traditional finance guys, no one bats an eye when they go on CNBC and say 400K Bitcoin. When we used to say even 20K like a year ago, people were like, "We are never getting there again." So the tides have shifted. The crypto guys are conservative now. On those podcasts you're doing with Andrew Schultz, Bert Kreischer, one of the things that popped into my head is, when are we going to get Pomp on Joe Rogan? Is that in the works? Can you give us any info there? Is that going to happen?
We will see. I've been doing less and less podcasts, but there's a couple of people that have asked me to do it. Andrew obviously is one. There's another one that should be coming out in the next couple of days. It is not Rogan, but it's kind of in that group of people who I think folks will enjoy. And so look, it's less frequency, but I think more focus on just the right audiences. And so maybe at some point I'll do Rogan, but I'm enjoying kind of talking to people I've been talking to.
I just want to see his face. I want to see what he says when you say $1 million Bitcoin.
Well, for him, I might have to say bigger number at a different time. People will have already heard.
Each podcast is just a bigger number. Oh man, Pomp, I appreciate you coming on, making time for my show. Can't say thank you enough. Like I said, we're gonna book this day every year for the next couple of years. See how well this thesis plays out, because it definitely has my mind turning. I imagine people listening are now interested as well. I mentioned it earlier, but please, it's in the show notes. If you watch here on YouTube, if you listen on iTunes and Spotify, go to Pomp's Twitter. He proposed it. Sovereign also retweeted it. If you think that thesis is attractive or interesting, at the very least, go show support. I'm personally going to do that. And also, maybe start thinking about DeFi outside of Ethereum. It's something that I didn't consider. Now I can see it. We'll see if there's a play or a way to make money there. But I'm definitely very, very interested. Appreciate you coming on, and hope to see you in Miami soon, man. I got to get down there. It's too cold here, man.
Let's go. Come on in.
I don't know what I'm doing. We need 100K Bitcoin. I need to be living in Miami. Pomp, appreciate it, man. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.